You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
June 17th, 1972, 3 a.m. Sergeant Leeper did not like the look of the man that was in the back seat of his car right now that he was taking to the police station. It wasn't that he looked shady. It wasn't that he was dressed badly. It was that he was dressed so nicely. Why would a burglar be dressed up so nicely and with so much equipment? Cash. He couldn't ask any of these questions right now. Not alone in the car with the perp. Not till they could get to the station, follow proper procedure. Probably someone's going to take over from him. After all, he was an undercover cop. In fact, if anyone saw this scene right now, it would look like the criminal should be arresting Sergeant Leeper. He looked less like a police sergeant than a guy on vacation. I am so glad I get to talk about Quince on My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. I have a pair of blue jeans from them that look better, hold up nicer, and fit better than many of those jeans with the brand names that you know about, especially because some of those key brand names just aren't getting it done these days the way they used to. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Still, even with the great inflation, still Quince is getting it done. Elevate your summer wardrobe. Go to quince.com/myhist for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/MYHIST for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/myhist.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
It blue slacks, a blue jacket with a university name across the front, and a golf cap. Maybe a guy drifting around Washington in the middle of the night, hoping to find someone selling marijuana, because that was part of his job, too. Leeper was part of the bum unit in D.C., the undercover unit. He was dressed down, blend in, look harmless, even look ridiculous. And he had just been told by a group of college students, "Get away from us, you narc." So there they were, the well-dressed burglar and the poorly dressed police officer, riding through Washington before dawn. Washington's government buildings sat dark and sealed, their columns and marble fronts. Great stone faces of the district were asleep. They were going to wake up to something major, but neither one in the car right now thought so. "1:52 a.m. Sergeant Paul Leeper, Carl Schaffler, and John Barrett are heading towards Georgetown in Washington, D.C. in their unmarked police car. And they just passed under the Whitehurst Freeway when a dispatcher alerted them to possible burglary underway. Doors open. Doors open. They do a quick U-turn. And a minute or two later, they pull in front of the hotel in the office building, and they walk into the lobby to look for the security guard. They don't have any expectation of running into this building guns drawn like that. Leeper says, we get all of these calls for burglaries in progress. 90 to 95% of them are nothing. Somebody saw something and they were mistaken. But as they're looking around, and the Watergate complex is interesting. It is a complex. There's apartments, hotel, and an office building, and a parking garage. And I was actually there in 2023. It's very nice, kind of cool to stay in the Watergate and everything like that. And they see that in the building connected between where the hotel and the parking garage and the office is, that there's tape on the door keeping it open. This is what the security guard had reported. Now they go in. Now their guns are drawn. They go up to the 6th floor. See some files on the floor. And one of the officers, Barrett, spots a moving figure. And as he approaches, 5 men rise up. They're wearing suits, ties, surgical gloves. They've got a walkie-talkie. They've got all kind of tools and electrical equipment. A lot of thoughts are going through their heads right now. First of all, if there's 5 of them here, there could be more somewhere else. There's only 3 officers responding. So Sergeant Leeper gets up onto a desk so he can kind of cover a greater distance and have height advantage. They've all got their guns drawn. They tell them to get their hands up. Officer Barrett spots a man who had a black overnight bag in one hand and a trench coat that's draped over his arm, and he's not putting it down. It is obscuring his other hand. So Barrett yells at him, drop the bag, raise your hands. He doesn't react. Now he points the pistol directly at his chest. Drop your bag. The man does nothing. Barrett will say later, I nearly shot him. Finally, one of the other burglars yells something in Spanish, and the guy drops everything and puts his hands up in the air. So the Watergate break-in was almost the Watergate shooting, police shooting. That could have elevated things even further. Who knows? But Lieber's still worried. Are there people like hiding under the desks here that we haven't seen yet? I mean, when you get 5, there could be more. They didn't have enough handcuffs. They have 1 pair of handcuffs. So they order everyone against the wall. They advise them of their rights. They find pen lights. They find tear gas canisters. And they find keys to one of the rooms. This will be the famous room 214, where Liddy was managing the operation in the Watergate Hotel. So they're going to get over there soon. They had already fled. And one of the suspects has a spiral notebook. And it's got a key taped to the cover. And Officer Schaffler sees this. He keeps trying to put this key into his pocket. Schaffler grabs it. The key would turn out to be the key to the desk of Ida Wells. And she's the secretary to Spencer Oliver. He's the executive director of the Association of State Democratic Chairmen. What do these guys want? Why are they taking desk keys, files, things like this? Of course, the cops on scene don't know. They act in every way like men that believe that everything's going to be taken care of, that they're not really getting arrested, that somebody's going to come in and clear up all this misunderstanding. They give fake names, but as they're being brought into the police station, one of the officers in the D.C. police station recognizes McCord as the head of the president's committee to re-elect the president's security. It worked with them before. This is really strange. And then there was the watcher. During the arrest, one of his officers noticed someone across the street at the Howard Johnson. Didn't pay much attention at first. They had things to do, suspects to arrest. But they could tell a guy from the hotel balcony was looking at them. People watch police work all the time. Everybody wanted to see what the cops were doing. Everybody thought his job looked easy from a distance. He thought, get back in your room, man. Shut the curtain. Let us do the job. But the man kept staring at him. And after a while, it changes the feeling. It's one thing for a hotel guest to peek out, be curious about the commotion. It's another thing for someone to stay there, fixed on the scene, watching too hard, too long. Who was he? Later it would be confirmed that feeling that the cops had that they were being watched was absolutely the case. The arrest and that key, that story that hasn't been told, and Spencer Oliver could give a little bit of insight as to what was going on here and what the reason was for the burglary. Now, Spencer Oliver, the executive director of the Association of State Democratic Chairmen, that's a very obscure position within the Democratic Party. You wouldn't think much about that. The state Democratic chairman, who cares, right? Well, it's pretty important in the politics of 1972 because you have George McGovern running, and he's got the kind of young hippie vote, and he's trying to break things down from the outside. And the state Democratic chairmen are very much the inside. This would be the people running the organizations. And if there's going to be a Stop McGovern movement, because you have to remember, Watergate burglary happens right before the Democratic convention. If there's going to be a Stop McGovern movement, this is the person that's going to be, and the state chairman in each party, the institutional fabric of the Democratic Party, are going to be the people that lead it. That's a key thing to remember. The burglary happens before the Democrats meet and elect McGovern. And they're concerned with the person speculating about trying to set up a Stop McGovern movement at the convention. Who would they go with? Probably a Humphrey. There's a ambitious governor of Georgia named Jimmy Carter, who there's been very little talk about, but he's interested, and he'll, at the convention, participate in this briefly. But it never goes anywhere. That makes the Watergate burglary equally tragic in a way, because there really was no reason to do it. But never in a campaign do you want to be satisfied, and that appears to be Nixon 72. At 8 a.m., FBI headquarters call up Special Agent Angelo Lano. They say, look, 5 international jewel thieves have been caught at the Watergate. They got lockpicks and things like that. And that's the best the cops can come up with. By the time he arrives at the police station, they show him this thing and say, what is it? You're the FBI. Do you know what this is? Is this a bomb? And Lano says, no, this is no bomb. These are devices that you would use to monitor conversation. This is a telephone bugging device. And within 15 minutes, the FBI lab confirms it. Lano's story, the initial FBI investigation, is interesting because they can't talk until like 20 years later, the Freedom of Information Act, and when the information's already out there. Lano is going to be very bitter that Watergate was a story that Woodward and Bernstein took credit for. I feel the Bureau solved it. We knew about the checks. We knew about the slush fund. We knew about the connections and dirty tricks. We knew about the other possible burglars. We knew quite a bit. The public will never know. The story of Bruce Givner gets little mention in Watergate. He's an accidental figure. I talked about him on a podcast about Frank Willis, the security guard in the Watergate story, the one that's going to see the door has tape on it. Strangely at night, what is going on? Calls the police. Starts everything. But Bruce Givner has a role in this story, and I read his book a couple of years back. He just wrote, and I'm sad to report that he passed away in October 2025. It's one of these things I'd thought about, like trying to contact him and get him on here and tell his story. The Mystery Man of Watergate. He's at least called in one newspaper article. But he's not a mystery man. He's a college student in Columbia Law at this time. As a summer intern, he goes to the DNC. They like him a lot for 2 reasons. One, he can talk to everybody. He's such a schmoozer. And they kind of need that because the DNC has to run this convention. And the establishment doesn't like the McGovern people. The McGovern people don't like the establishment. They need somebody who can kind of handle that. So he's great. And plus, he has a motorcycle. So he can ride around the city and deliver parcels as they need. You know, he doesn't get paid a lot. I'm not even sure if he gets paid. So one thing he can do, though, is use the DNC's long-distance service. This college student guy, he's originally from California. He's calling old professors. He's calling old girlfriends. He's talking for a long time. When he's done calling, he picks up the phone again and dials someone else. What he doesn't know is right across the street, he's being watched by Baldwin, the lookout. And they're getting real frustrated because the whole operation is being put off further and further into the night. And at one point, they see him go out to the balcony and they're like, yeah, okay, he's done. And no, he's going to relieve himself in a plant out there. He goes back and makes more phone calls. And their frustration increases. It's midnight when he goes downstairs. And the security guard, Willis, is like, hey, you have to sign in. I didn't see you come in. And he goes, no, I don't have to. I was here all day. I just was still here. Willis thinks it's a little strange. But, you know, as we said, Givens a good smoozer, and he's smoozing okay. Anyway, and they both go over to the Howard Johnson, which also has a cafe, and order hamburgers. They don't eat them there. It's takeout, but it takes a long time. It takes about 20 minutes. And that whole thing will be critical because that's when the Watergate burglars will then go in. It's now June 17th, the early morning hours. They'll go in and make their operation. It's when Fred Willis comes back and he says goodbye to Givner. Givner goes on his motorcycle. Never talks to Willis again. Willis is then going to discover the tape, set the whole thing going. Givner's role is important because it pushes the whole operation later into the night when actions become more suspicious. Why is this door taped this late at night? But he doesn't know who's involved. And in fact, when a reporter talks to Willis, he says, well, there was this guy that was there at midnight, and he went off in a motorcycle. I think he had something to do with it. And so at least one New York Times article has him as the mystery man of Watergate until he talks to him. The police also talk to Givner. He's just not important to the story enough to have made it into all the accounts, but he was right there and I think played a critical role. Later, Givner would say, when he hears that Willis had said that he might have been involved, how could he do that to me? We were burger buddies of Watergate. Sadly, Givner died last year, as I said, but I want to give a plug to his book. Go find Bruce Givner. I forget the name of the book, but find it under his name. And I think it's My Watergate Story. It's a funny book. He's a funny guy. Should have got more attention. Leonard Garment, he replaces John Dean. So he becomes White House counsel for the Nixon administration after Dean resigns, right in the middle of Watergate. And he has some quotes, and one of them is something to the effect of like, you had no right to bring that Watergate scandal to the American people. What he really meant by that is not so much that the reporters didn't have a right, but that the American people didn't deserve to have this psychological burden, to have their view of the presidency changed. It's an interesting thought because when we talk about Watergate, that's really what happened, and that's why it's significant. You could talk about, it's not like there wasn't anything that Lyndon Johnson did or Kennedy did or things like that. And Nixon was full of examples. He was trying to get examples of what Kennedy did, say, in South Vietnam, where the president was assassinated or things like that. But
he's going to come along. He told me he was. And he's got to comply or his ass. It's his ass, not ours this time.
It was the first time that Americans were exposed to a president talking like the way that Nixon talked, particularly on the tapes, when tapes that he made were discovered. And they're weird tapes. So they're not like the usual presidential speech. You got clinking glass, static, footsteps, and suddenly a voice. Okay, John, good night. Get a good night's sleep and don't bug anybody without asking me. God damn it, get those files. Blow the safe and get it. You know, comments like this. It's hard for modern audiences to really experience it. Even after television, there's still this image of the presidency, dignified, restrained. We had Franklin Roosevelt, who had been in the presidency for 16 years. It had Eisenhower, that was tremendously popular and respected. Kennedy had just died in office. Lyndon Johnson may not have been, but there still was a respect for the office. You think about those recent presidents, this is how you don't hear presidents plotting or raging or swearing.
This anti-Semitism is stronger than we think, you know. It's unfortunate, but this has happened to the Jews. It happened in Spain. It's happened in Germany. It's happening, and now it's going to happen in America if these people don't start behaving.
Even when they weren't, Nixon's not incriminating himself, it's almost just as damaging when he just talks in these kind of like Godfather terms. By the way, the 73s where the Godfather movie's out, people are overhearing something they shouldn't have heard. And this is as far as I'll go, like defending Nixon. I always bring this up when I talk Nixon. Not every president was taped, particularly after Watergate. Nobody wanted to tape themselves. And Nixon didn't just tape himself, he taped everything. The tape machine was always on in the White House. It wasn't a switch on, switch off. Now you hear Lyndon Johnson sometimes. That's him. He first tells the operator to turn the recording on. So it's a phone call he wants recorded. With Nixon, he wants it preserved for history, so it's everything. He doesn't want to miss a thing. And it ends up being what did him in. I mean, the tone really hurts. So you have some Republicans that might otherwise have supported him. The tapes come out. It's really difficult. Gerald Ford, who's made vice president, his initial reaction is party line all the way. There's nothing on these tapes that incriminate Nixon, at least when they came out and weren't fully reviewed. But then after a while, when there's so much criticism of what's said on these tapes, he has to say some of the language was pretty harsh. Friends start telling Jerry Ford to back off a bit from being the defender of the Nixon administration. Republican leader Hugh Scott, senator, calls the transcripts deplorable, disgusting, shabby, and immoral. Senator Robert Packwood said Nixon's conception of government was rather frightening. Nixon's speechwriter Emmett Hughes says the Oval Office wasn't the place of wise deliberation that people expected. I just can't make that point enough. You got newspapers who are conservative, like the Omaha World Herald said the president should resign. We were appalled, says the Chicago Tribune, big Republican paper. So that's what Leonard Garment says, that the American public should not have been exposed to Watergate. It's probably Nixon who has made the gravest mistake. Aside from the scandal itself, he has his taping system. And he has a fork in the road with taping. He nearly destroys the tape. This is after his own White House lawyer, his White House counsel, John Dean, gets his own lawyer and starts meeting with prosecutors under the guise that he's sussing the case out against them. But really, he's bailing. He wants to talk to the prosecutors for a deal. Now, this is something I think has to be understood about John Dean because, he's become kind of a mini hero of Watergate. On the Senate hearings that are going to come later, he's a prominent figure exposing the Nixon administration. But for a good year, he was part of the entire cover-up. He was part of the conspiracy. And if he didn't see a threat to himself, which comes from another event we'll talk about, from the McCord letter, he probably would have just covered it up and never talked. But when he does flip, Nixon is on the tapes saying, "The hell with Dean." I don't think I want to keep in the record things that we're talking about with Watergate. I mean, we've discussed a lot of stuff. He's getting closer to destroying the tapes, but he never quite says it. Haldeman's in the room with him, his chief of staff. The reason is Nixon thinks the tapes will prove his innocence. I don't think he said anything wrong here. Haldeman says, no, that won't work. Even if there's nothing on these tapes, And it's amazing. They're having a conversation about tapes while they're talking on tapes about the conversation on tapes. No, they'll just say you had discussions in other rooms where you did the conspiratorial acts. It can't clear you. It can only convict you. And later in the same day, Nixon seems convinced. And Haldeman confirms, okay, so we want to take out any national security parts of the tapes and get rid of the rest. And Nixon says, that's right. Haldeman reinforces in his diary that Nixon says he wanted them all taken out. But then he notes the boss switches his mind later at night. Just install a turn-off, turn-on system. I'm still concerned about history covering everything. Here, right here, is where history could have been different. No tape, probably no impeachment. No shock, no huge disappointment of people. Yes, there still would have been a Nixon scandal here. Big scandal. A lot of people leaving the White House. A lot of investigation. Some prosecution. And maybe even successful one. Maybe that leads to impeachment. But probably just a president with a low approval rating, a bad midterm, press inquiries without these tapes. But here's, I think, the most important part that's being missed, particularly when people say, like, Nixon didn't do anything that other presidents did. But you have to remember that Watergate isn't just the burglary, and it's not just about lying to the press. It's about lying to the courts. It's about making others lie in front of a judge. That's it. I mean, because the burglary itself gets written off pretty much during the 1972 campaign. Lawrence O'Brien tries to use it. George McGovern tries to use it. The Washington Post is putting out stories, but nobody else really is. And it kind of dies. No one's talking about it significantly. But in 1973, when the burglars are sentenced, one of them, McCord, isn't happy. He thought he was going to get bailed out by the White House. He thought an attorney general would make a phone call and they'd be unlocked from prison and sent home. So he writes a letter to Judge Sirica. Now, Sirica is a boxer whose immigrant Italian parents had told him to go to law school. It's a Depression-era, scrappy lawyer, ends up getting to a law firm, supporting Eisenhower Nixon, oddly enough, big with the Italian-American community, and gets a place as a federal judge in 1957, partially because he supported Nixon, at least as vice president. And he's going to be central to the story because he gets a letter from McCord that says, everything's a lie, perjury has occurred, a witness lied or deceived, or didn't state the facts correctly. Political pressure was applied to the defendants to remain silent. Perjury occurred, and it occurred in matters highly material to the government's case. Others who haven't been identified to this court could have been, and witnesses chose not to. And by the way, it's not the fault of my attorneys. They're just doing their job. He writes this letter, hands it to his probation officer. The probation officer hands it to the judge. The judge has to hand it to a clerk, get it into the court's record, and then has the clerk read the note. When this comes out as a firestorm, and this a year later is what sets off Watergate and makes it a TV scandal. Now you have a Senate investigation with legs, and it is on TV every single day. Finally, Ben Bradley at the Washington Post, they've been getting clubbed by people for covering this Watergate story again and again. Now everybody's on it. In the White House, Nixon continues to just do this cover-up, and he's kind of playing the lawyer and says, okay, we're going to get John Mitchell, who had been Attorney General, to take the fall. Just tell him apples and oranges. They told me about the burglary, but I wanted one thing. They did another. They told me about the operations they were doing. I wanted one thing. They did another. I didn't tell them to do a burglary. I did not realize, etc., etc. Haldeman agrees. He authorized apples, and he bought oranges. Yeah, that's it. Nixon acting as the criminal lawyer. Now the LA Times publishes a story. McCord had talked to him. Now the Senate starts taking action. You've got a judge now who feels a crime happened in his courtroom, but he can't do a thing about it. And that's, at least initially, the most compelling spark of Watergate, not the burglary itself. So finally, after 1 year of these city reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, out there talking about the connection between this burglary and the White House, they're finally put on the list to get a Pulitzer that year. They weren't even on the list. The press establishment really didn't like this story. The other reporters in the Post weren't pleased that these two city reporters kept getting these front page articles about this. The White House had denied every Woodward and Bernstein story and called the credibility of the Post into question. Now you see White House Press Secretary Ron Ziegler go out and say, "We are wrong." Now the New York Times joins, and they're going to catch up quick. Seymour Hersh will do something like 40 stories the next couple of months on Watergate. He's going to start to compete with Woodward, and actually the two have lunch at times. They play tennis. They have friendly competition. Woodward ends up going to a source, and because he's still reporting on the story, talks to him, and the source is like, "Oh, Mr. Woodward, I have a note for you." Hands the note, and it says, "Bob, I was here first, Seymour." So now all the press is involved. And now you get Dean cooperating, and the chips start to fall. Thanks for listening. Much of Woodward and Bernstein's work reflected what the FBI already knew, partially because the FBI's own director, who Nixon had appointed to replace the recently deceased J. Edgar Hoover, Patrick Gray, had slowed down the investigation, stopped certain interviews, and actually destroyed evidence, throwing it into a fireplace. FBI Director Patrick Gray was both investigating the Watergate story and also reporting to the White House, particularly counsel John Dean, on a regular basis about the investigation. John Ehrlichman and John Dean persuaded Patrick Gray to destroy political sabotage files from Howard Hunt's executive office building safe. They said the material is not related to Watergate, but if it's exposed, it's going to reveal national security secrets. Gray burns them, these documents, in his fireplace. And there's a number of files that were burnt. One is believed to be a dossier that Hunt had assembled on Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts, and a State Department cable that Hunt had doctored, so it wasn't real, to make it appear that John F. Kennedy had ordered the 1963 assassination of President Diem in South Vietnam. Gray's never prosecuted for this, but he had destroyed evidence, and he will resign. One of the most interesting figures to emerge from Watergate was not a politician, a prosecutor, even one of the burglars. It's a person that many might not like for things that he's been alleged to do, and it's Lieutenant General Vernon Walters, who at the time of all this was the deputy director of the CIA. Walters had spent decades in government service. He translated for presidents. He served in military intelligence. He had a reputation as a disciplined professional, and he kind of stayed out of politics. Yet in June 1972, he plays a role in all of this, one that doesn't get talked about a lot. June 23rd, 1972, less than a week after the break-in, Walters was summoned to a meeting with White House Chief of Staff Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and CIA Director Richard Helms. Haldeman did all the talking, according to Walters. "You got to be concerned about this, Walters," they say. We've got to shut this down. And just say that it's a CIA operation, this whole thing.
On the investigation of the FBI,
go into acting FBI Director Gray's office and urge caution on this. So this is interesting. Coming from the White House, instead of the White House ordering Gray directly, they want Walters to do it, that this all has to be covered up because CIA investigation. Walters believes it's a directive. His boss, Helms, is there. Walters and Helms know that the Watergate burglary had nothing to do with their agency. And he knew of no CIA activity that would be endangered by an FBI investigation into Mexican banks. Walters testifies that after returning to CIA headquarters, he checks with officers responsible for Mexico, quickly confirms this suspicion he had that, there's nothing the CIA is doing. He carries out the meeting with Gray. He informs the FBI director that some White House officials were concerned about possible CIA implications. So this is different than what they want Walters to do. He avoids telling Gray the concern is from the CIA, and he doesn't say the names of where it's coming from, Haldeman and Ehrlichman. He began investigating if there's any real basis for the claims, sees that there's not. John Dean enters the picture. He calls Walters repeatedly and seeks meetings. During meetings with Walters, Dean explored whether the CIA could somehow contain the scandal. See, you're tempted to think of John Dean as a hero, and, maybe some of his actions were positive, certainly later. But you also have to look at him as someone who failed at a cover-up. And if he could have gotten this angle, if Walters would have agreed, you may never have heard the name John Dean much, because the story might have gone nowhere. Walter says, Mr. Dean, any attempt to involve the agency in stifling this affair would be a disaster. It would destroy the credibility of the agency with the Congress and the nation, and it would be a grave disservice to the president. I will not be part of it, and I am quite prepared to resign before I do anything that will implicate the agency in this matter. I could not tell him verbally, and even less, I would not give him a letter saying that the pursuit of the FBI's investigation would jeopardize CIA investigations in Mexico when it wasn't true. However, if there was a letter on the direct order from the president, and I was given an opportunity to explain to the president how dangerous I thought this action would be, and he still wanted to do it, I would then resign. By August 1973, Walters testifies, before the Senate Watergate Committee, the cover-up's collapsing. Dean had already turned and implicated the White House officials. Nixon tapes emerged. This plan for a cover-up with Nixon's fingerprints on it, is part of the smoking gun tape. But for many, it seemed like a theoretical conversation. We could just blame this on the CIA and say it was a covert operation. Not everyone was aware of how far they went with it in actually involving the agency. But Vernon Walters refused to go along. Not a Watergate hero. He did not become a whistleblower. Many people think Walters had something to do with the plot against Allende in 1973, or the Brazilian, Latin American activities, a Brazilian military coup that took over in the 1960s. So he's not a popular figure in all circles. But there was a moment of quiet resistance, intra-agency conversations that stopped the cover-up of Watergate in its tracks.